What's up, YouTube? I'm back. It's your boy G-Pegs, and I'm here with another Fitness at 40 lifestyle video. So in today's video, just like to talk a little bit about my personal fitness journey and what that looked like, when it started, how it's changed, and where it's at currently. So I grew up playing sports, and like most athletes, I got introduced to weightlifting pretty early on. I had a group of older friends who were athletes, and they started lifting weights. So when they started lifting weights, I was kind of just there for the ride, and they introduced me to weightlifting. And by that, I mean bench pressing in their backyard. So it's not something I did consistently. It's not something, that I guess you would say I learned very much from. It was kind of just like, hey, you're the younger guy, you're hanging out with us, so why don't you give this a try? But soon after that, I realized that I really did have a fascination with lifting weights, and it was, again, a part of sports. So it was something that I decided I wanted to get into. Even as a kid, I used to watch The World's Strongest Man. It would run on blocks, I believe on USA TV. Kind of dating myself at this point, but yeah. They used to show it pretty much for like 3 hours at a time, and I used to just sit there and watch it. I was fascinated by how big and strong all these guys were, and some of the weights they were able to lift, and some of the things they were actually able to do. So flash forward to being around 12 years old. My father got me a really cheap bench press with a standard, which is the 1-inch bar, with some plastic weights that have the sand in them. And that's pretty much how I got started. So I grew up playing basketball, football, and track. And at 12 years old, I got this weightlifting set and I started lifting weights. I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that the older kids did bench presses. I had seen people do squats. I'd seen people do curls. So pretty much my initial training program as a preteen was benching, squatting, chin-ups, curls, glute bridges, and sit-ups. And around 12 years old, I was kind of starting to hit puberty, and I started lifting weights. I started that program. Now there was also other things I would do. I'd also do wall sits. I would also do calf raises, and I would do a lot of push-ups. But all that mixed together was basically my routine, and I kind of did that every other day or so, if I remember correctly. And from 12 years old to 13 years old, I really started the process of puberty. So I grew several inches, I got a lot stronger, I got a lot more athletic. And I believe the weightlifting or the training program that I was doing myself really kind of jump-started that process and kind of helped me a little bit. Even though, it wasn't a great program, it was enough to help increase my performance along with obviously hitting puberty. So in the 8th grade, I was a really good athlete for middle school. I excelled in basketball, football, and track. Then the following summer, entering high school, I was officially introduced to the high school training program. So I guess you can say this experience, like many other athletes, is pretty much when we hit the ground running, so to speak, full swing with weightlifting. And that was, all the compound lifts, a lot of accessory work. I did go to a good high school. It was a real big high school, lots of kids, really good programs, a really good history of their programs. And we happened to have, a good lifting program at the time. So that being said, I was full force into that, gung-ho, just like all the other athletes around me. Getting bigger, getting stronger, all that good stuff when you're a kid. However, I did experience a couple of injuries in high school that kind of halted my progression as an athlete, even as a lifter. And as a teenager in high school, young man, you only do pretty much what you're told. I mean, I was reading a lot of magazines. I was looking at stuff on TV. The internet wasn't as big back then. We're talking like 2000, 2001. So a lot of the stuff that you would get information from were the magazines, the videos, the DVDs, or the shows you would happen to catch. That being said, I did have some injuries and it did delay some of my progression and actually regressed me a little bit as an athlete and in the weight room. However, at the time, I did know that lifting weights was something that I loved to do and it was going to be a part of what I was doing no matter what. After high school, I did go to college. I did continue to play football. I was able to recover from injuries and the training did change. So the training did get a little more specific. The training did get a little more variety into it. There were a lot of exercises I started doing that I didn't do in high school. There was some differences in programming. But again, as an athlete, you kind of just do what you're told to do. There's really no questions asked about it. So you kind of just go with that flow. You're hoping for the best. You're hoping that your strength and conditioning coaches know what they're doing. And in most cases, that is the truth. But in some cases, not so much. But again, I did have some nagging injuries in college, but at this point, kind of knew how to address them a little better, working with colleges and strength and conditioning coaches. There's way more knowledge than in high school. So that kind of works itself out. So starting in middle school, lifting weights, kind of just doing my own thing, getting to high school, being introduced to a proper training program year round, then leaving high school, going to college, being introduced to another type of programming in college where that's a little more tailored to me as an individual, to me as an athlete, more strenuous, more exercises, different exercises. So it develops you differently than in high school. Also a little older at that time, you're not a teenager anymore, you're now a young man going into full adulthood, so your body's still changing, you still have a lot of hormones still going, so you get a lot of good gains. Great increases in size, strength, and performance. And just like following any program, if you're consistent, you're going to see results. After all that was all said and done, I did have the experience of lifting from middle school, high school, and college. Okay. In college, I was initially a kinesiology major because, like I said, I knew that I loved lifting weights. I knew that I loved all aspects of training. I loved performance-based training. So I started getting into that a little bit, to just dive a little deeper, learn a little more. I started trying to actively seek out more information, just become better because I love to do it. I did end up continuing my athletic career after college. I played rugby for a while. So when I was playing rugby, you're kind of left to your own devices as far as training goes because here in the United States, there are more semi-pro teams, there are club teams, and as that goes, it's not professional level. People are not getting paid tons of money. So you kind of just do things on your own, which is what I was doing, using my experience from my athletic career growing up as a child, as a teenager, as a young man, putting that all together with all the stuff that I was still actively seeking out learning. And at this point, so the internet is the internet, and I'm out there and I'm looking, YouTube becomes a thing. So we're starting to get a whole bunch of information, starting to pick and choose certain aspects of training, play with things, play a little bit here and there. And as I said, I've had injuries before, so I was always doing some type of rehab, prehab type training, just kind of molding what would become my philosophy of training pretty much, or my approach to training. Flash forward to now, where I'm done playing sports, done with my athletic career, okay? It's a lot different now. I'm a lot older than I was when I first started, first started at 12 years old. Now, 40 years old, things are going to be a lot different. My training has changed a ton since I initially started, since I went to high school, since I went to college, since I was an athlete, running around, traveling abroad. It's changed a lot. I've continued to develop the process, the philosophy that I have to train. So not only has the training changed a lot, but considering my age, that is a factor now. My recovery, how my body feels, the training age that I have, the injuries that I've had, all that stuff plays into effect of how I train now. As I've stated in other videos, currently I use a conjugate system of training. So what is that? That is 4 training days broken down into 2 upper and 2 lower days. One of those days is a dynamic effort day where I'm working on being explosive and generating as much force as possible with light, moderate weights. Second day of training is the max effort day. That's where I'm trying to move as much weight as I possibly can while maintaining good form, good technique. And again, this is just a variation of a conjugate template. Conjugate is different for everyone. Everyone has their own weaknesses and strengths, and everyone has their own goals and objectives of training. The way I do things will look a lot different from the way someone else will do things, especially considering my training age, my actual age, and my injury history. Okay, so that's currently 4 days of lifting weights, and I have an additional 2 days where I do something active. Again, I'm a former athlete, once an athlete, always an athlete. So you get that itch. You want to compete. You want to do something athletic. I know that competing in powerlifting, you are considered an athlete. However, it is not the same for someone who has played basketball, football, rugby, and boxed. It's completely different. Again, that's what I like to do. So I set aside 2 days to actually do something very athletic. One of those days is sparring. So on the weekend, we spar. Put the gloves on, put the headgear on, get in the ring, and we go. Now, as I said in the other video, some days just working on skills, some days we're trying to beat each other up. So kind of just depends. It's athletic, it's fun, it's something I like to do. It really gets out that competitive nature in me, that one as an athlete where you want to compete one-on-one against someone else. So that's what I do. The other day, I play basketball. So I grew up playing basketball, pretty much always played basketball. I love it. It's really fun. It's a great opportunity to get out there, meet new people, compete against a lot of people, and just have fun. And at the end of the day, it's great for conditioning, just like boxing. So those are 2 things that I do separate from the lifting, but it's all part of my current programming. Now there are 2 other days during the week where I do a boxing type of workout, which is shadow boxing, heavy bag work, and then a lot of technique work, a lot of defensive head movements, a lot of footwork, moving around, simulating boxing. So that gives me 3 total days of boxing training throughout my week. So again, overall, at this point, I have 4 days of lifting weights, 3 days of boxing, and 1 day of basketball. Last but not least, I walk. I walk every day. The way my schedule goes now, I'm fortunate enough to have a break throughout the middle of the day, and I get my walk in the middle of the day, and then I get a walk in at night before I go to bed. So that's how we do it. Just a great way to stay active. It's a great way to get your steps in, get your NEAT up, and keep yourself healthy. All right, guys, so now for the real talk. What are the differences now in my training at 40 years old compared to 30 years old, compared to 20 years old, compared to being a teenager? Right? It's different. As I said before, my training is totally different now than it was 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I've learned a lot more at this point. I've applied a lot more. I've found things that work, things that don't work. And at this point, I have to be very conscious of recovery. I want to say that's probably the biggest thing that I've experienced that is different. One being I can't just go to the gym like I used to in my 20s and lift for 2 hours straight for no rhyme or reason. I used to do that in my 20s. Didn't make sense then. Doesn't make sense now. The only difference being I used to be able to recover back then. If I try to do that now, there's no way I'm recovering in a couple days. So I would say that's one of the bigger issues is just your recovery. Your recovery time changes. You know, you can still lift hard, you could still lift heavy, you can still really push it, but you're gonna be sore. You're gonna need time to recover between your next workout. So overall, you really just need to be a little more strategic. You need to have a better plan. You need to be able to execute that plan. For me in my 30s didn't differ much from my 20s. I would say the biggest issues that I had from 20 to 30 would be injuries. I've never had a very catastrophic injury, something that kept me out for a year, something that required major surgery. I've always had soft tissue things, like hamstring was always one of them when I was an athlete. I did tweak my lower back as an athlete, but those were always things that I was generally able to recover from in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks. In my 30s, though, I did realize that the training I was trying to do, which was I was trying to train still like I was in my 20s, saw an uptick in some of these soft tissue injuries. So I began then to realize that I had to really think about what I was doing and I had to program a little differently. From being in my teens to being in my 20s, the only real difference was structure. Because when you're in your teens, you're in high school, you kind of just do what they tell you to do, and then you just kind of do your arms all day. So everyone wants big arms when they play football, so you're just trying to work on your arms all the time. But that's what really the difference was from my teens to my 20s was I had more structure, I had a goal, and I was trying to achieve that goal. So, instead of just doing what people were telling you to do, I was beginning to formulate and structure, program, for an overall benefit. And now, right, in my 40s, from my 40s, my 30s, my 20s, again, recovery. Recovery is a big deal, but also programming. Like you have to be on point with what you're doing if you want to see results the older you get. And as I've been saying, a big issue for me is to still remain somewhat athletic, to still be able to do some of these things that I was able to do in my 30s and in my 20s. So that takes practice, that takes time. You need to dedicate time to those skills or those skill sets because at this point, as the saying goes, if you don't use it, you lose it. Can't expect to be really good at playing basketball in your 40s if you haven't played for 10 years. So overall, as I've said, the training has changed and it should change, right? You should keep learning, you should keep experience, you should keep growing, you should be able to progress. There are differences the older you get. However, if you are consistent, if you are in the gym, if you're always lifting, if you're always trying to get better, those differences you will experience, but they're not going to keep you from doing what you want to do. And the worst thing you could possibly do is just stop. In my experience, injuries are going to be part of the game, just like anybody else. However, you can mitigate your recovery times, you can minimize the chances of getting injured. The more you learn, the better your programming is, and the better you execute your programming. So I'd like to believe at this point, being 40 years old, that this is the best my training has ever been. And a statement to that is, if I do happen to tweak something, if I do happen to get a soft tissue type injury, whether I'm doing something athletic at the time or I'm lifting at the time, the recovery time for that is very minimal. And it doesn't prevent me from continuing to train. I've learned to incorporate things into the training that can simultaneously help me recover, rebuild, rehab, prehab, all the things I need to do to continue making progress. So that's about it, guys. About to wrap this up. Hope you enjoyed the video. And as usual, please like, subscribe. If you have any comments, any questions, hit me up. Remember, you're not too old. You just have too many excuses. Peace.